The old McAllister farm had been abandoned for as long as anyone in the nearby town could remember. Rumors swirled about why the family had left so suddenly, leaving their sprawling estate to the ravages of time and nature. Some said they had gone mad, driven to insanity by something lurking in the shadows. Others whispered about strange rituals and occult symbols found in the barn, but no one ever had proof. It was just an old, decaying farmstead. Until that summer, it was late June when the Peterson family moved into the farmhouse. Drawn by the allure of starting anew in the countryside, they ignored the whispers and bought the property for a steal. Robert and Linda Peterson, along with their 2 children, Sarah and Jack, were eager to leave the hustle and bustle of the city behind. They envisioned a simple life, growing their own food, raising a few animals, and basking in the tranquility of rural living. The first few weeks were idyllic. The kids played in the fields, Linda planted a garden, and Robert busied himself repairing the old barn. The farmhouse, though aged, was sturdy, with creaky wooden floors and the comforting smell of aged pine. At night, they sat on the porch, listening to the symphony of crickets and frogs. The only thing that gave them pause was the large, ancient oak tree that stood at the edge of their property, its gnarled branches reaching toward the sky like twisted fingers. One evening, Sarah came running in from the fields, her face pale and her eyes wide with fright. "I saw someone by the tree," she gasped, clutching her mother's arm. "A man. He was just standing there, watching me." Robert grabbed a flashlight and stormed out to the oak tree, but found nothing. He dismissed it as Sarah's imagination, overactive from the excitement of their new life. But the unease had taken root. The following night, as the family sat around the dinner table, they heard a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from outside. Robert went to investigate but found no source for the sound. It continued intermittently over the next few days, growing louder and more persistent. It seemed to come from the barn. Robert finally decided to spend a night in the barn, armed with a shotgun and a resolve to get to the bottom of the mystery. The night was thick with darkness, and the silence was oppressive. Hours passed without incident, and Robert began to doze off. Suddenly, he was jolted awake by the sound of scratching, like nails on wood. He swung the flashlight around but saw nothing. Just as he was about to give up and return to the house, the beam of his flashlight caught a movement in the corner. His breath caught in his throat as he saw a figure, a gaunt, shadowy man with hollow eyes staring at him. Before Robert could react, the figure dissolved into the darkness, leaving only a cold, lingering dread. The next morning, Robert didn't speak of what he'd seen, but the strain was evident in his face. He spent the day boarding up the barn, determined to keep whatever it was at bay. Linda noticed the change in him but chose not to press, hoping it was just the stress of the move. That night, the tapping started again, louder and more insistent. It seemed to reverberate through the entire house, making sleep impossible. When morning came, they found strange symbols etched into the wood of their front door, symbols that none of them recognized. Linda decided to visit the town's library, searching for any clues about the farm's history. She found an old, dusty book about local legends and folklore. One chapter caught her eye, The Curse of the McAllister Farm. The story detailed how the McAllisters had dabbled in dark rituals, trying to summon a spirit to protect their land. But something had gone horribly wrong. Instead of a guardian, they had unleashed a malevolent entity that drove them mad and eventually led to their disappearance. Linda returned home with a sense of foreboding. She shared what she had learned with Robert, who listened in grim silence. That night, they decided to keep watch together. As darkness fell, the tapping resumed, now accompanied by whispers, indistinct and malevolent. Just after midnight, the whispers grew louder, and the temperature in the room dropped sharply. A shadowy figure appeared at the foot of their bed, its eyes glowing with a sinister light. It reached out with elongated fingers, and the whispers turned into a cacophony of screams. The family bolted from the bed and ran outside, only to be confronted by a scene of horror. The oak tree at the edge of the property was now surrounded by shadowy figures, their hollow eyes glowing in the dark. The air was thick with a malevolent presence, and the ground seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Robert, driven by a desperate need to protect his family, grabbed an axe from the barn and charged at the tree. As he swung, the shadows closed in, their whispers turning into a deafening roar. With each strike, the tree seemed to bleed darkness, and the ground shook violently. Finally, with one last, desperate swing, the tree cracked and fell. The shadows let out a wail of agony and dissipated into the night. The ground stopped shaking, and an eerie silence fell over the farm. The Petersons left the next day, abandoning their dream of a rural paradise. The farm remained empty, a silent monument to the horrors that had unfolded. And as the years passed, the oak tree slowly regrew, its twisted branches reaching once more towards the sky, waiting for the next family to come and disturb its dark secrets. Years passed, and the McAllister farm once again fell into disrepair. The Petersons' departure became another story added to the farm's chilling lore. Over time, nature reclaimed the land, vines and weeds creeping over the dilapidated structures, while the sinister oak tree stood as a lone sentinel, its twisted branches a reminder of the darkness that lay dormant within. In the nearby town, the farm's tale turned into a ghost story, a cautionary tale shared around campfires and during Halloween. But as often happens with such stories, the reality of the danger faded into myth, and soon, the farm was little more than a local legend. Then, one autumn, a group of college students from a nearby university heard the stories and decided to investigate. They were drawn by the thrill of the unknown, by the desire to experience something genuinely terrifying. There were 5 of them: Jason, the adventurous leader; Emily, his practical girlfriend; Mark, the skeptical science major; Lisa, the horror enthusiast; and Tom, who was always up for a dare. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and a sense of invincibility that only youth can bring, they set off for the farm one crisp October evening. They reached the property just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the decaying farmhouse and the sinister oak tree. Undeterred, they pressed on, eager to uncover the truth behind the legends. The air grew colder as they approached the farmhouse, and a sense of unease settled over them. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, musty interior. They fanned out, exploring the rooms and documenting their findings. Broken furniture, faded photographs, and a pervasive sense of abandonment greeted them. Lisa, ever the horror buff, suggested they split up to cover more ground. Jason and Emily headed to the barn, while Mark, Lisa, and Tom explored the farmhouse. As Jason and Emily walked towards the barn, they noticed the oak tree's branches seemed to move despite the still air. Emily shivered, but shrugged it off as nerves.